Marry me, and I promise I'll never ask you for anything else." The words escaped Emily Carter before fear could pull them back, echoing through the royal hall with a clarity that stole every whisper from the room. Hundreds of nobles froze where they stood beneath towering crystal chandeliers, their jeweled glasses suspended in midair, their conversations dying into stunned silence. At the far end of the marble chamber, seated upon the ancient silver throne carved with the symbols of every Alpha who had ruled before him, Alpha King Damian Blackwood slowly lifted his eyes toward the trembling young woman standing alone in the center aisle. Emily could feel every heartbeat pounding against her ribs. This was madness. 10 minutes earlier, she had been racing across the palace courtyard with tears burning her eyes, her elegant shoes abandoned somewhere on the stone pathway because running barefoot hurt less than hearing Jason Brooks call her name one more time. Jason had once promised forever. Then forever had become control. Every decision had required his approval. Every smile she shared with another person became another accusation. Every dream she mentioned became something he insisted should belong to both of them. When she finally ended their relationship, he refused to believe it was over. Instead, he announced to everyone that the wedding would happen anyway. He had invitations printed. Flowers delivered. Musicians hired. He smiled as though her answer had never mattered. Emily realized that escaping him would require something impossible. So she chose the only man powerful enough that Jason would never dare challenge him. Alpha King Damian Blackwood. Stories about the king had filled every town she had ever lived in. Some called him cold. Others called him untouchable. Many claimed no woman had ever managed to surprise him. Looking into his calm silver eyes now, Emily almost believed every rumor. They revealed nothing. No anger. No amusement. No confusion. Just quiet attention that somehow felt heavier than any shout. Around her, the council members exchanged bewildered glances. A few nobles whispered behind jeweled fans. One elderly duchess nearly dropped her cane. No common woman had ever interrupted a royal audience this way. No one asked the Alpha King to marry them in front of half the kingdom. Emily swallowed hard, wishing she could disappear into the polished marble beneath her feet. Maybe this had been a terrible mistake. Maybe guards would escort her outside before she embarrassed herself even further. She drew a shaky breath and lowered her eyes. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "I know I have no right to ask this. I know it sounds unbelievable. But if I leave this hall unmarried today, my former fiancé will never stop following me. I don't want your fortune. I don't want your crown. I only want my freedom." The silence that followed felt endless. Somewhere outside, a church bell marked the hour. Damian rose from the throne with unhurried confidence, each measured step echoing across the chamber until he stood only a few feet away from her. Emily kept her gaze lowered, unable to read his expression. Then, before anyone managed to breathe, the Alpha King spoke two words that would change both of their lives forever. "I accept." A wave of disbelief swept through the hall, but what no one noticed was the nearly invisible smile that touched Damian's lips for the briefest moment, as though this impossible proposal was something he had been waiting far longer to hear than anyone could possibly imagine. The sound of dozens of voices crashed through the royal hall all at once, but Damian Blackwood did not acknowledge a single one of them. His attention remained fixed on Emily Carter, who still seemed unable to believe what had just happened. She stared at him with wide blue eyes, searching for the smallest sign that he might be joking, but his expression remained composed, steady, and impossible to read. The members of the royal council quickly rose from their seats, their formal robes sweeping across the polished marble floor. One senior advisor cleared his throat before speaking with careful respect. "Your Majesty, perhaps this decision deserves further discussion." Damian turned his head only slightly. "It has already been discussed." The advisor looked confused. Emily felt even more confused. Discussed? They had never met before today. At least she was certain they had not. A murmur rolled through the chamber as servants hurried to prepare the ancient marriage ledger that had recorded every royal union for generations. Emily suddenly realized this was becoming real. Her pulse raced so fast she wondered if everyone around her could hear it. She took one uncertain step closer to Damien. "Your Majesty," she whispered, careful that only he could hear, "you do understand that I only asked because I needed protection, do not you?" For the first time, something almost resembling warmth softened his silver eyes. "I understand exactly why you asked." His answer should have reassured her. Instead, it created even more questions. Before she could ask another one, the towering doors at the end of the hall burst open. Every conversation stopped instantly. Jason Brooks strode inside with hurried determination, his expensive suit slightly disheveled as though he had searched every corner of the palace to find her. His breathing slowed the moment he saw Emily standing beside the Alpha King. Relief crossed his face before giving way to disbelief. "Emily," he called, forcing a smile that looked painfully rehearsed. "There you are. Everyone has been worried. Come home with me. We can forget this misunderstanding." Emily instinctively stepped backward, but Damien quietly moved one step forward without raising his voice or changing his expression. The simple movement placed the Alpha King between Emily and the man she had spent months trying to escape. Jason stopped several feet away. His confident smile faded. Even he understood there were boundaries no one crossed. "Your Majesty," Jason said with a respectful bow, "this is a private matter between my former fiancé and me." Damien answered without hesitation. "It stopped being private the moment she requested my protection." Jason looked directly at Emily. "You cannot seriously believe this marriage will happen. You do not even know him." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. The truth was painful. She did not know Damien at all. She only knew she had trusted him in a single desperate moment more than she trusted the man she had once planned to marry. Damien finally looked toward Jason. His calm voice carried effortlessly across the silent chamber. "She owes you no further explanations." The room fell completely still. Jason lowered his eyes, clearly recognizing that arguing with the Alpha King inside the royal hall would accomplish nothing. Without another word, he turned and walked away, though the determined look on his face suggested this story was far from over. As the massive doors closed behind him, Emily released a breath she had not realized she had been holding. She looked up at Damien with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. He held her gaze for a long moment before offering an answer that puzzled her even more than his acceptance had. "You are thanking me far too early, Emily. Our story did not begin today. Today is simply the day you finally walked back into it." Emily had expected the royal palace to feel cold, distant, and intimidating, but as the enormous iron gates closed behind her carriage that afternoon, the silence surprised her more than anything else. There were no cheering crowds waiting to greet the kingdom's future queen. There were no elaborate celebrations. Only quiet stone courtyards warmed by golden sunlight, carefully tended gardens, and guards who bowed respectfully every time she passed. Everything felt orderly, almost peaceful. It was nothing like the terrifying stories people whispered about Damien Blackwood. A gentle knock came at the door of the private suite prepared for her. Before Emily could answer, an elderly housekeeper entered carrying a tray filled with tea, fresh bread, and warm berry pastries. "His Majesty asked that you eat before unpacking," the woman said with a warm smile. "He also instructed everyone to make certain you feel comfortable." Emily blinked in surprise. "He remembered that?" The housekeeper smiled again. "His Majesty remembers everything." After she left, Emily slowly walked through the spacious rooms. A fireplace quietly crackled in the sitting room. Fresh flowers rested beside the windows overlooking the forest. The bedroom contained shelves already filled with novels, blankets folded neatly across the bed, and a writing desk placed beside the sunlight. It did not feel like a palace chamber prepared for royalty. Somehow, it felt as though someone had tried to prepare a home. That realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Later that evening, Emily wandered into the palace library, hoping a book might distract her restless thoughts. Endless shelves stretched toward the ceiling, carrying stories collected over centuries. She reached for one volume near the top shelf, but before her fingertips could reach it, another hand gently lifted the book and offered it to her. Damien stood beside her, dressed not in ceremonial robes but in a simple charcoal sweater and dark trousers. Without the crown, he looked less like an untouchable ruler and more like an ordinary man carrying extraordinary responsibility. "Thank you," Emily said quietly, accepting the book. "I did not know you came here." A faint smile appeared in his eyes. "I come here when the palace becomes too loud." She glanced around the silent library and almost laughed. "This is loud." "Compared to the forest," he answered. The unexpected reply caught her completely off guard. They walked slowly between the towering shelves without speaking for several moments. Instead of uncomfortable silence, there was an odd sense of ease that Emily could not explain. Finally she gathered enough courage to ask the question that had been following her since the royal hall. "Why did you really say yes?" Damien stopped beside a tall window overlooking the moonlit gardens. His reflection shimmered beside hers in the glass. "Would you have believed any answer I gave you today?" Emily hesitated before shaking her head. "Probably not." "Then I would rather wait until you are ready to hear the truth." His answer frustrated her, yet somehow it did not feel dishonest. Before she could respond, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. A young palace attendant rushed into the library carrying a stack of unopened letters. "Your Majesty," he said nervously, "these arrived from the capital this evening." Damien accepted the letters without opening them. One envelope immediately caught Emily's attention. She recognized Jason's handwriting across the front before Damien quietly turned it over and placed it beneath the others. He did not even break the seal. "You are not going to read it?" she asked. Damien looked at the unopened envelope for only a moment before placing it into the fireplace. The paper curled into bright orange flames until nothing remained except soft gray ash. "Some doors," he said calmly, never taking his eyes off the fire, "are meant to stay closed once someone finally finds the courage to walk through a better one." Emily watched the last ember disappear, but deep inside she could not shake the growing feeling that Damien had been expecting her arrival long before she had ever found the courage to ask him for help. The first rumors reached the palace before sunrise. By breakfast, they had spread through the capital like autumn leaves carried by a restless wind. Some claimed Emily had tricked the Alpha King into a marriage he would soon regret. Others insisted Damien had chosen her because she possessed some hidden gift no one else had recognized. Emily heard every version without leaving the palace walls. She sat quietly beside the dining room window, stirring her tea long after it had grown cold. It amazed her how complete strangers seemed so certain they understood her life. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Damien entered carrying a folded newspaper. He placed it on the table without looking at the front page. "You do not need to read it," he said calmly. Emily looked at the bold headline anyway. It questioned whether the kingdom's future queen had manipulated the royal family. Her shoulders sank. "They do not even know me." Damien pulled out the chair across from her and sat down with surprising ease. People often fear what they cannot explain. Eventually they become bored and search for another story. Emily forced a faint smile, wishing she possessed his confidence. Before she could answer, another advisor entered with several official documents. "Your Majesty," the man said carefully, "Lord Jason Brooks has requested an audience with the Royal Council. He claims there are legal concerns regarding Miss Carter's sudden engagement." Emily's stomach tightened. She had hoped Jason would finally accept her decision. Instead, he seemed determined to keep rewriting a story that had already ended. Damien accepted the documents with little expression. "Schedule the meeting for tomorrow morning." The advisor hesitated. He also requested that Miss Carter attend. Damien glanced toward Emily before answering. Only if she chooses to. The simple sentence settled something deep inside her. For the first time in a very long time, someone had offered her a choice instead of making one for her. The next morning the council chamber filled with judges, elders, and representatives from several neighboring packs. Emily remained beside Damien as Jason entered dressed in an immaculate navy suit, carrying himself with polished confidence. He smiled politely toward the council before turning to Emily. "I have never wanted conflict," he began smoothly. "I only wish to protect someone I care about." Emily has been under enormous emotional pressure. I believe her decision was made in confusion rather than clarity. Several council members exchanged thoughtful looks. Emily lowered her eyes for a moment, remembering how often Jason had spoken for her instead of listening to her. Then Damien quietly broke the silence. "Miss Carter is fully capable of speaking for herself." Every face in the room turned toward Emily. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Months ago she would have remained silent, afraid of disappointing someone else. Today felt different. She slowly stood and folded her trembling hands together. "No one forced me to come here," she said, her voice soft but steady. "No one forced me to ask for help. I ended my previous relationship because I no longer felt respected. I came to the palace because I wanted the freedom to choose my own future." Jason's expression tightened, though he quickly recovered his practiced smile. "Emily, you are simply overwhelmed. You will realize this once you calm down." Emily looked at him for a long moment before gently shaking her head. "That is exactly what I used to believe. I thought if I explained myself one more time, everything would become easier. But respect cannot exist where one person refuses to hear the other." The chamber fell completely silent. Damien never interrupted. He never answered for her. He simply remained beside her, allowing her voice to fill the room on its own. For the first time since walking into the palace, Emily realized that the greatest protection he had given her was not his title or his power. It was the space to finally become the person she had almost forgotten she was. The palace slowly settled into a comfortable rhythm, and for the first time in many months, Emily Carter discovered what peace actually sounded like. It was not complete silence. It was the laughter of gardeners tending roses beneath the morning sun. It was the quiet turning of pages in the library. It was the gentle ringing of the clock tower every hour. Most of all, it was waking each day without wondering who might demand an explanation for every choice she made. Yet one question refused to leave her mind. Why had Damien Blackwood looked at her that day as though he already knew her? The thought followed her through every corridor and every meal until one cool evening she wandered into the oldest wing of the palace while searching for a balcony overlooking the forest. The hallway was lined with portraits of former kings, queens, and respected families whose names had shaped the kingdom for generations. Candlelight danced across the polished frames, casting warm reflections against the stone walls. Emily paused in front of one painting that seemed strangely familiar. It showed a young woman standing beneath a silver maple tree, smiling gently toward the artist. Her features were different, yet something about her expression felt uncannily close to Emily's own reflection. Curious, Emily continued walking until another portrait stopped her in place. This one had been painted nearly 25 years earlier, according to the small brass plaque beneath it. It depicted Alpha King Damien as a young man, although he appeared only a few years younger than he did today, standing in the same moonlit garden outside the palace. What caught Emily's attention was not Damien. It was the faint outline of another figure in the distance. A young woman wearing a light blue dress stood beneath the silver maple tree with her back turned toward the painter. Emily leaned closer. Her heartbeat quietly quickened. The dress looked almost identical to one Emily remembered wearing as a little girl during a family celebration. Before she could study the painting any longer, a familiar voice spoke softly behind her. "That hallway usually raises more questions than it answers." Emily turned to find Damien standing several feet away, his hands resting comfortably in the pockets of his dark coat. He did not seem surprised to find her there. In fact, he almost looked as though he had expected it. Emily glanced back toward the portrait. "Who is she?" Damien followed her gaze without answering immediately. "Someone important?" Emily asked again. He smiled gently, though there was unmistakable sadness behind it. "Very important." His answer only deepened the mystery. Emily looked at the small brass plaque again. "This painting is older than I expected. The woman looks familiar somehow, but that cannot be possible." Damien remained quiet for several moments before walking beside her. Memory has unusual ways of returning. Sometimes it begins with a place. Sometimes with a face. Sometimes with a feeling you cannot explain. Emily looked up at him. "Are you saying I have been here before?" Damien met her eyes, but instead of answering directly, he reached toward the nearby window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Outside, the moon cast silver light across the palace gardens. At the center stood the same towering maple tree from the painting, its branches moving gently in the evening breeze. "Do you feel anything when you look at it?" he asked. Emily stared into the moonlit garden. She should have felt nothing. She had no memory of this place. Yet without understanding why, a strange warmth settled inside her heart, followed by an unexpected sense of familiarity, as though some forgotten part of her had finally found its way home. She slowly placed a hand against the cool glass, unable to explain the quiet emotion rising inside her, while Damien watched in silence, carrying the unmistakable expression of a man who had waited years for that single moment to arrive. Emily barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the silver maple tree returned, standing beneath a bright full moon while an unfamiliar feeling settled over her heart with quiet certainty. It was not a memory she could explain. It was more like hearing the final note of a song she somehow recognized without remembering where she had first heard it. By sunrise she found herself walking back toward the garden, drawn there by a feeling stronger than curiosity. Morning light filtered through the leaves, painting soft patterns across the stone path. The palace grounds were peaceful, disturbed only by birds greeting the new day. Emily slowly approached the towering maple tree and rested her fingertips against its weathered trunk. The bark felt cool beneath her hand, but the strange warmth inside her returned almost instantly. Most people walk past this tree without looking at it twice. Emily turned to see an elderly woman wearing simple gray robes standing nearby with a woven basket of herbs resting on one arm. Her silver hair was neatly braided, and kindness filled her gentle eyes. Emily recognized her from the palace only by reputation. She was Eleanor Ashford, the royal historian and keeper of the kingdom's oldest records. "It feels familiar," Emily admitted softly. Eleanor smiled as though she had expected that answer. Some places remember people long before people remember the places. Emily glanced back at the tree. "I have never been here before." Eleanor did not disagree. Instead, she stepped closer and brushed a fallen leaf from the ancient roots. When His Majesty was younger, he spent many evenings beneath this tree. Everyone assumed he came here to escape the responsibilities of the crown. Only a handful of us knew he was waiting. Emily frowned slightly. Waiting for what? Eleanor looked toward the palace windows before answering. For someone he believed destiny would eventually bring home. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. That sounds like a fairy tale. Many truths do, Eleanor replied with a quiet laugh. Before Emily could ask another question, footsteps approached along the garden path. Damien appeared carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. He offered one to Emily without saying a word. Eleanor bowed respectfully before excusing herself, leaving them alone beneath the spreading branches. For several moments neither of them spoke. They simply watched sunlight dance across the gardens. Finally Emily broke the silence. "She said you used to wait here." Damien looked up into the silver leaves moving gently in the breeze. "I did. For years." "Yes." Emily searched his face, hoping this time he would stop speaking in mysteries. "Who were you waiting for?" Damien's calm expression softened. "Someone I promised I would never stop believing in." Emily lowered her eyes, unsure why those words stirred emotions she could not explain. "You keep talking as though our lives crossed long before we met in the royal hall." Damien nodded slowly. "Because they did." Emily looked back at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "Then why did you never tell me?" He smiled with quiet patience. "Because some truths cannot be given to another person. They have to be discovered when the heart is ready to accept them." A gentle breeze carried several silver leaves to the ground between them. Emily watched one land near her feet before bending down to pick it up. As her fingers closed around the leaf, a brief image flashed through her mind. A little girl laughing beneath this very tree while a younger Damien stood only a few yards away, smiling as though he had just witnessed something precious. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Emily standing perfectly still. She looked up with tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming feeling that the impossible was slowly becoming real, and Damien quietly met her gaze with the peaceful expression of a man who knew the first forgotten door had finally begun to open. The announcement spread across the kingdom before noon. Representatives from every major pack would gather in the Grand Assembly Hall for a public hearing regarding the royal engagement. No one called it a trial, yet everyone understood what was truly at stake. Emily Carter stood before the mirror in her room, smoothing the sleeves of a simple ivory dress. She had worn elegant gowns before, but this felt different. Today she was not dressing to impress anyone. She was dressing to speak her own truth. A quiet knock sounded at the door. Damien Blackwood stepped inside after receiving her permission. He wore his formal black suit with the royal crest embroidered in silver across the collar, yet there was nothing intimidating about him at that moment. His calm presence carried the same quiet reassurance she had come to depend on without realizing it. "You do not have to attend," he reminded her gently. "No one will think less of you if you choose peace instead." Emily smiled softly. "For a long time I confused silence with peace. They are not the same thing." Damien nodded with unmistakable pride shining in his silver eyes. Together they walked toward the assembly hall where rows of seats had already filled with council members, pack leaders, scholars, and citizens invited to witness the proceedings. A respectful hush settled over the room as Damien and Emily entered side by side. Moments later, Jason Brooks stepped forward with practiced confidence. He addressed the council with polished words, insisting that Emily had acted impulsively, that she had been frightened, that she simply needed time to reconsider. He spoke about history, expectations, and promises, carefully avoiding the one subject that mattered most: Emily's own wishes. When he finished, the chief elder turned toward Emily. "Miss Carter, the council will hear your decision directly. No one else may answer for you." Every face in the chamber focused on her. The weight of so many eyes would once have stolen her voice. Instead, she drew one slow breath and stepped forward. "There was a time when I believed love meant proving myself over and over again," she began quietly. "I believed that if I explained my feelings clearly enough, eventually someone would respect them. I was wrong." Her voice grew steadier with every sentence. "Real respect begins the moment another person accepts the word no without asking for another explanation. Real kindness allows someone to choose freely, even when the answer is disappointing." Jason lowered his eyes, but Emily no longer looked toward him. She turned instead to Damien, who remained silent exactly as he always had whenever she needed to speak for herself. She smiled with quiet certainty before facing the council once more. "No one arranged my future for me. I chose it. I walked into the royal hall because I wanted a different life. I stand here today because I still do." The room remained completely silent until the chief elder asked one final question. "Then before every witness gathered here, whom do you choose?" Emily met Damien's eyes. All the confusion that had once filled her heart had slowly given way to something stronger than fear. She no longer saw a distant king surrounded by impossible legends. She saw the man who had protected her freedom before asking for her trust, who had never spoken over her, and who had patiently waited for answers she had not yet found within herself. Without hesitation, she answered in a clear, unwavering voice. "I choose my husband." For a heartbeat the entire chamber stood frozen. Then applause rose gently from every corner of the hall, growing louder as one by one the pack leaders stood in respect. Damien did not celebrate or boast. He simply looked at Emily with the quiet smile of someone whose greatest victory had never been winning a kingdom, but earning the willing trust of the woman standing beside him. When the assembly finally ended, the palace did not erupt into celebration as many expected. Instead, a quiet sense of relief settled over the kingdom. The question that had divided so many voices had finally been answered by the only person whose opinion truly mattered. Emily Carter had chosen freely. As she and Damien Blackwood walked through the palace gardens that evening, the cool air carried the scent of blooming jasmine and fresh rain. For several peaceful minutes neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable, like two people learning that they no longer needed words to understand each other. Emily looked toward the silver maple tree glowing beneath the rising moon. "Everything feels different now," she said softly. Damien glanced at her with a gentle smile. "Because you are no longer carrying yesterday with you." She considered his words and realized he was right. For months she had measured every decision against old fears. Now those fears seemed strangely distant, as though they belonged to someone she had once known instead of the woman she had become. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the arrival of Eleanor Ashford, who approached carrying an ancient wooden box carefully wrapped in blue velvet. She stopped beneath the maple tree and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," she said warmly, "the time has come." Damien nodded, though his expression revealed quiet emotion Emily had never seen before. Eleanor placed the box into Emily's hands. "This has remained unopened for many years," she explained. "His Majesty instructed that it should only be given to the woman who chose him of her own free will." Emily looked at Damien in surprise before slowly lifting the lid. Inside rested a delicate silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon surrounding a tiny sapphire. Beneath it lay a folded letter, the paper softened with age. Emily carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Damien's, though the date written across the top made her heart stop. It had been written nearly 20 years earlier. Her hands trembled as she began reading. "If destiny is kind, one day you will stand beneath the silver maple again. You may not remember me. You may not remember this place. That is all right. I do not ask you to remember. I only hope that when our paths cross again, you will be free to choose your own future. If that future does not include me, I will still be grateful that you found happiness. But if you choose to stay, then every year of waiting will have been worth it." Emily lowered the letter, unable to speak. Tears quietly filled her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that Damien had never expected anything from her except freedom. He had never searched for a way to convince her. He had only hoped she would one day arrive by her own choice. She looked at him through blurred vision. "You wrote this before you even knew whether I would come back." Damien nodded. "Hope does not require certainty." Emily stepped closer until only a few inches separated them. "Why did you never tell me?" His answer came with the same calm honesty that had always guided every conversation between them. "Because love offered before someone is ready becomes another burden. I wanted it to become your discovery, not my demand." Emily gently closed the wooden box and held the pendant against her heart. At that moment she finally understood the quiet strength everyone had mistaken for coldness. Damien had never ruled through fear or control. His greatest power had always been patience, kindness, and the courage to let the person he loved choose her own path, even if that choice had once carried her far away from him. Morning sunlight poured through the cathedral windows, scattering ribbons of gold across the polished stone floor as guests from every corner of the kingdom gathered in respectful silence. There was no trace of the uncertainty that had filled these halls only weeks before. The whispers had disappeared. The doubts had faded. In their place stood quiet admiration for a woman who had found the courage to choose her own future and for a king who had never demanded that choice. Emily Carter paused at the entrance, wearing a graceful ivory gown with the silver moon pendant resting gently over her heart. She looked toward Damien Blackwood waiting near the ancient altar beneath the royal crest. He was not watching the crowd. He was watching only her, with the same calm smile that had greeted her from the very beginning. As Emily walked forward, she realized she no longer felt like someone seeking refuge. Every step carried confidence she had earned for herself. When she reached Damien, he offered his hand without speaking. She placed hers in his, and together they turned toward the chief elder. The ceremony was simple, honoring tradition without unnecessary grandeur. They exchanged promises not of perfection, but of honesty, patience, and mutual respect. When the final vow had been spoken, the chief elder lifted an elegant silver crown shaped with delicate maple leaves and crescent moons. He placed it carefully into Damien's hands. The hall became perfectly still. Damien looked at Emily for a long moment before gently setting the crown upon her head. "Today," he said softly, his voice carrying through the cathedral, "this kingdom does not receive a queen because she married a king. It welcomes a Luna because she chose kindness over fear, courage over silence, and freedom over comfort." Warm applause slowly filled the room as Emily felt unexpected tears gather in her eyes. She remembered the frightened woman who had run barefoot through the palace gates believing she had reached the end of every possible road. She had believed she was asking for protection. Instead, she had been given something far greater. She had been given the freedom to become herself again. After the ceremony, the celebration moved into the palace gardens where children laughed beneath the silver maple tree and musicians filled the afternoon with gentle melodies. Eleanor Ashford quietly approached Emily and smiled. "Do you know why that tree has always remained at the center of the palace?" Emily shook her head. Eleanor looked toward the shining branches. "Because every generation needs a reminder that the strongest roots grow slowly, hidden beneath the surface long before anyone notices the tree." Emily glanced toward Damien, who was speaking warmly with several young visitors, listening to each of them with genuine attention despite wearing the weight of a crown. She smiled as understanding settled peacefully inside her heart. The greatest love she had ever found had never chased her, trapped her, or spoken louder than her own voice. It had waited with patience, protected without possession, and trusted that one day she would arrive through her own decision. As evening painted the sky with shades of blue and silver, Emily slipped her hand into Damien's. "I used to think I came here because I had nowhere else to go," she whispered. Damien smiled gently as the first stars appeared above the silver maple tree. "No," he answered. "You came home because your heart was finally free enough to find the way." Together they stood beneath the quiet branches while moonlight settled across the palace gardens, and for the first time in many years, neither of them was waiting anymore.